Just one person pressed the button.
Hello, and welcome to Let's Drone Out with our special guest, Mustard Tiger. Tonight, we're going to be talking about formation flight. But before all that, we are joined by Commander-in-Chief Frank.
Good evening. Hello.
Everyone's favourite curry kitten.
Hello.
And our special guest, that way, Mustard Tiger.
Hello.
He's going to be staying off camera this evening, but he'll be around to do all the talking and explain this in a whole bunch of detail. Also, myself, Stephen Belrick, bringing you a very interesting project this evening, formation flight. So could you give us the rundown on formation flight? Maybe the where and the why, and just kind of explain how you came about the idea and what you wanted to do with it?
Absolutely, yeah. So formation flight, the kind of headline description, what it is, it's open source inter-UAS positioning and telemetry for FPV. It's a whole lot of words. If you've heard previously of the project, which went by a few names, INAV radar, ESP32 INAV radar, some variation of that. There were a couple of authors of that, Olivier C. being one of the main ones. This is sort of the spiritual successor to that project. So the general goal of this is, if you're flying as a group, if you're flying with anything you want to keep track of the position of, you have a small beacon device which goes in every aircraft and shares position with other aircraft that are flying nearby you. The reason I came to developing this in any way, I always wanted to use INAV radar. I do a lot of formation flying with some friends locally out here in the Pacific Northwest. And it's really easy to lose each other when you're doing formation flights, especially analog, especially, any degree of long range. It's easy to lose each other. And when you do lose each other and you've got, the perfect sunset, the perfect spot, everything is perfect, but you can't find each other to get that nice formation flight shot. That's frustrating. So I looked into INAV radar. I had some of the hardware for it, some of the dev boards, but they seemed pretty heavy. And I'm also an ArduPilot user for my fixed wing stuff. So that was out the window for me off the hop. The first thing I did was made some light changes to the original INAV radar project so that it would function on Express LRS 900 megahertz hardware. That is significantly smaller, lighter, cheaper, and I already had it lying around, so that was perfect. The next thing I did was ported the OSD part from INAV into ArduPilot. So that I could use it with my ArduPilot aircraft, and then flew a couple of test flights with it. It worked great. And I decided, there's a few little tweaks I'd like to make to this, and maybe I can upstream it into INAV radar. And as I started making more and more and more and more changes, it just kind of grew and grew and grew and grew. And eventually I took a look at the code, and it's like less than 2% of INAV radar's original code still lives on, and most of it is vestigial, and I should probably clean it out. So at this point, I broke off the fork on GitHub, called it its own project, and now there's two distinct projects. If you still want to run the original INAV radar, it still exists, but Formation Flight is the spiritual successor, does all the same things, and hopefully does them cheaper, smaller, faster, all the nice things that I would hope to achieve.
So is that the difference then between formation flight and INAV radar? Is the hardware that it needs to work?
Yeah, so hardware is the initial thing, right? INAV radar runs on the sort of ESP32 LoRa dev boards you can get your hands on. They're about $30-$45 somewhere in that range from AliExpress and the like. They weigh a good bit. They can be 50-60 grams, and they're pretty large. They have built-in OLEDs, all sorts of things that frankly aren't really necessary for the project. So the first thing I did with Formation Flight was to add additional hardware, a significant amount. I then went on and in the process of all the many rewrites, I added support for the 2.4 gigahertz band, which means you can use the very small 2.4 gigahertz Express LRS receivers. And then sort of the main changes, the main reasons why somebody who currently uses INAV radar might want to move to Formation Flight. It updates 10 times as fast. It supports 6 people in the air instead of 4. It can use 2.4 gig, 900, and 433, as well as 868, of course. It has a very nice web UI for configuration and display of information. as compared to the Bluetooth serial console that the original iNav radar used. Altogether, my goal with it was, as I said before, cheaper, better, faster. All around, it should be something now, you can install it in sub 250 G aircraft very easily. Because it updates faster, the tracking is much tighter. It's much easier to find people, all that.
Has a lot of features.
Yeah.
So I saw when I had a quick look through the website that it already works with iNav and Ardu Pilot, and you've written your own fork for Betaflight until that's in the code. Have we got some screenshots of exactly what you would see as a pilot? Obviously, you've got your SD, and basically you've got, if I saw it right, you've got like a little thing saying sort of pilot B is this direction, or does it give like height or distance, or what does it give?
Yeah, so I'm sending some links. Those are some links that describe it well. To be clear, the Ardu Pilot changes are not yet upstreamed. I've been maintaining my own fork. I just want to make sure it is very, very, very safe before I consider upstreaming it. I've been flying it for a couple months now, though, and it's been absolutely rock solid. So that's I think we're at a good state where I should probably move to get it merged upstream. As to the OSD implementation, you might notice the iNav one is pretty, in my opinion, complicated. It's trying to be a HUD, which I think is a really, really cool idea. And of course, opinions are everybody's own, right? And my opinion is that the HUD idea for a character-based OSD just doesn't really work for me. It jumps all over the place. It never quite shows you where the person actually is. Sometimes it covers them up while you're trying to follow them. So when I ported this to Ardu Pilot, I chose to take a simpler approach, which looks a bit like a home arrow with a altitude component as well. I've got this second link I sent you. If you scroll down to the bottom there, I've got a screenshot from Analog DVR.
Was that the walk snail example?
The non-walk snail one, no. So the walk snail example, the one you're looking at right now, this is from built into iNav, where you can see that sort of B element moving all over the screen. And then, yeah, this is the way I implemented it. Just above the wind speed in the bottom left, where you can see the letter C and an arrow and 1,500 meters. That's saying back relative to the direction the aircraft is flying, 1,500 meters, and down 124. This was a beacon not connected to an actual aircraft, which not sure if we want to jump into that yet next, or if you have an agenda, we can stick with that.
No, by all means.
I'm just interested to see how it looks, because obviously, yeah, I take your point. If you've got like a pixel-based OSD, then that sort of nice smooth thing on a radar screen will work very well. But when you haven't, I think it's, as you said, it's much more sensible to have like just a fixed thing to say the C is this way, and here's the altitude, and here's how far he is away. I think that works better. Yeah.
And that's what's worked tremendously well for me. We're all used to flying towards a home arrow if we need it, so this is the same kind of thing. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, this is a beacon, not necessarily connected to an aircraft. This is one of the other things I wanted to support with formation flight versus iNav radar. iNav radar requires being connected to an MSP-capable flight controller to establish its position and everything. With formation flight, I implemented built-in GPS capabilities so that if your formation flight radio has its own GPS, it can be a beacon on its own. That might seem silly. Why would you want that? Well, a couple of things. One, if you're doing cinematic work and trying to, say, follow somebody, follow a car, you get the idea.
Yeah.
You stick these beacons in the car, you stick these beacons in whatever you want, and now you've got a real-time lock on exactly where they are. This allows you to do some really cool stuff. Everybody loves the cinematic shot where the drone rises over a visual obstacle, right? And as they rise over the obstacle, the thing they're supposed to be looking at is in shot. Normally, that's hard to time. That's hard to figure out, right? You got to know where everybody is. You got to be on radios. Now you've got an arrow pointing to exactly where that thing is you're supposed to be following. Makes it much easier to sort of hit that target.
You can also do it with multiple participants as well.
Yeah, exactly. So this will work with up to 6 people in the air at a time. So you and 5 of your best friends can all have this positioning up and running.
That does sound interesting. And I mean, you're saying as well, like the big feature of this is that it uses very cheap hardware, and I saw it as using. The one I was looking at was using the EP1, so it's like in the UK that's like £10 for an ELRS receiver. Like, you don't have to be using ELRS, obviously. You can just have this being just the formation flight radio, and then can you is that what you're then just wiring into a GPS receiver?
Yeah, so it gets wired directly to an MSP speaking UART on your flight controller. So just the same ways you would wire in, say, a DJI Air unit or Walk Snail unit, anything like that. Same exact configuration, just turn on the MSP flag, and that's what it takes. I've got specific instructions on the formationflight.org website for how to set up each flight controller, but not to get too far down that road. Yeah, so it's not specific to Express LRS at all. You can use this with Dragon Link, Crossfire, Tracer, ELRS, whatever you might choose to use. ELRS just happens to be a really good way to get affordable hardware, easy to find hardware, and lightweight hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're saying that, for £20, me and a mate could have these radios connected and be seeing each other on our OSDs, that's pretty impressive.
Absolutely, yeah. And versus the hardware that would otherwise be required to run iNav radar looks like around $31 right now. So it's
and that's per airframe, so that's doubling that just to have the first dot on your screen.
Yep. All with smaller antennas, faster updates. Yeah, it's a hopefully a pretty compelling argument to be made.
Absolutely.
If someone's beginning, I looked at the flashing side. That the flashing's a little bit more involved than Express LRS, right? You need to use the kind of ESP programming tools, developer tools.
You got a couple options. For now, I haven't built my own configurator or anything. Right now, the project is pretty much me and a couple of other folks who have made some contributions. Thank you very much, by the way. But to that end, Express LRS has almost a dozen regular devs. I'm soloing this, so no configurator, nothing fancy. The plus side is the binary packages we create in our build system, which includes automated builds every time I issue an actual release, right? Can be web flashed to an ELRS receiver. So if you have a brand new ELRS receiver out of the package, you can boot it up, hop onto its Wi-Fi, upload Formation Flight, and now it runs Formation Flight.
Oh, that's really nice. Okay.
Yeah, so nice and slick in that way.
And the subsequent updates are done over its own web interface as well?
Yep, that's correct. All over the air, updatable and everything.
Wow. Suddenly, the existence of cheap Wi-Fi chips has made a lot of the configuration hassle evaporate. We often reminisce about old times on this show and VTXs, which had dip switches and the like, and it seems like a different world compared to that. That's really impressive to be able to do that on 11 mils by 11 mil, 100 grams worth of hardware.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really impressive what the ESP chips have allowed us to do. And especially, keeping up with the timing of all six, and the ESP just keeps on doing it. It's happy to do it. I've got a screenshot for you. I'm not sure the best way to get that to you of what the web UI
just drop that in the private chat, we can share it. Or if you want to share it through your web browser, we can pop that into the stream as well. It's under the present button.
Yeah, I'm not certain it's not going to kick me out if I drag and drop into the private chat. Does that work? Like a file or no?
I don't know if we can share files. Do you have a link to it?
I'll upload
just drop it on Discord to me, and I'll pull it out.
That works too. Okay. There we go.
Yeah. Well, while you're sorting that, I mean, I think we can definitely all think back to a time where this would have been handy, where we've been, flying around as a group, and like you say, particularly on the analog stuff, but even with digital, finding people in the air. I mean, even with a fairly large model to chase, it can be tricky sometimes. If you've got a fairly dark model against the ground, like it can be...
You get 50 yards away, and all bets are off unless you've got perfect video, right?
Yeah, for people who haven't tried it before, it is really difficult, and getting the hang of it is a real skill. And so we've done things in the past, like we'll do sort of a lap. So we all going around a lap, and we can kind of get each other. But if you're on sort of a further out, and you're trying to do some sort of epic chase from a distance and you lose somebody, it's like, where are you? I'm over the trees. Yeah, there's trees everywhere. Whereabouts over the trees? By the field. Yeah, that's still like vague. It just goes on and on. And yeah, having that sort of thing's really handy. And being able to just, even if you can't see them and you're starting to draw towards them, if you can just see how far you're away, then you can manage your speed. Because what can often happen is like, I see you, as you go soaring by.
And you're on
because you've got the speed all
you
on.
have to catch up with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies. I dropped the screenshot into the Formation Flight Discord. My apologies. While I'm here, may as well shout that out. Hey, there's a Formation Flight Discord. The link is in the description of this live stream if you want to jump into it.
That is how I got into it. So yeah.
There you go. If you need any help
works.
setting it up, if you have any questions, I'm there pretty often. And there's a nice community of lovely folks who'd be happy to answer your questions.
So this is what you see off of your tiny little ELRS receiver.
Yeah, the image looks like it's getting
Wow.
cut off just a little bit. There's a little bit more on the right side. I'm not sure if.
Let me try and just zoom. I had it zoomed in. Let's unzoom. There we
Okay.
Yeah, for everyone listening along, this is I mean, if you saw this just in a normal website, you wouldn't think anything of it. I mean, it's a very nicely polished dashboard of all the devices. It looks very nice.
Thank you. I'm not a front end web designer. I put on my front end web designer hat and slapped this together in a day, and I think it turned out all right for all things considered. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. It's oh gosh, what is it? Tailwind is the framework I used.
That looks cool.
So in
So
terms of
for our audio listeners, we've got a very cleanly designed web page with a dashboard and an update section. We've got some readings from the flight controller to tell us whether one is attached or otherwise. We've got the GPS status. We've got a list of peers and whether encryption's enabled or not, which is an interesting feature. More on that later, I guess. And then we can see a list of peers and we can see a list of radios. So you can see at a glance, am I actually going to pick up any peers? Let's check on the ground. Let's make sure we can all see each other before we go and lift off and start flying on this system. So that's kind of neat.
Absolutely, yeah. So I can talk through a few things in this display as well. Up in the top left corner, you can see what flight controller it thinks it's connected to. It supports, as I've mentioned, iNav, ArduPilot, and then I guess we accidentally rabbit trailed a little bit off of this. There is a Betaflight fork that I have put together. It is more ugly than the ArduPilot fork. I would not recommend flying it. I have tested it for a grand total of about 5 minutes, but it does appear to work. It does the thing. It renders the thing on screen, which would be quite nice for folks who do run Betaflight.
Could we persuade you to do a PR?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to PR this.
I think the 4.5 cycles just going through RC now, but 4.6 wide open for PRs and a good time to start discussing the best way to do this.
Sounds lovely. There's a couple of changes I want to incorporate from the ArduPilot version I wrote into the Betaflight fork. So I'll get that going. Of course, as I mentioned, there's a lot to do, and I'm one man, so I'm doing my best.
Well, yeah, you've probably got judging by the time between 4.4 and 4.5 release candidates, I don't think there's a hurry on that one.
Gotcha. Yeah, there you go. Other things, I mentioned that you can use an internal GPS, but by default, Formation Flight will just pull GPS from your flight controller, so no need to do anything crazy there. All you got to do is hook it up to an MSP UART, and it will negotiate with your flight controller, figure out GPS location, all of that. The encryption is an interesting note, as you mentioned. More on that later. iNav radar is unencrypted, which is fine for what it's intending to be. My reason for adding encryption is not necessarily for privacy first and foremost. The goal of it is to essentially prevent people from cross-talking, right? Be able to use different groups, and if we can get some very light crypto in there, as a matter of course, that might be nice. One thing to note, or I suppose a few things to note. The crypto is not super duper secure. It will not stand up against an actual dedicated attacker. It's good enough. Again, it's intended primarily to be a intergroup deterrence, effectively.
So instead of having to set a group ID and tally that up across all the members who are flying in a field, say you enable crypto, and when you see each other, you negotiate a crypto key, and then if another group of flyers a few miles away happen to like start spewing signal and you can hit and you can see them, then that's going to be discarded and not start confusing you when you're in the air.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the main goal. If you do want to rotate this key, it's a little complicated now. Again, that's one of the things on the back burner to clean up. But yeah, this does exist, and it hopefully should provide, you know, the bare minimum of additional privacy as well, if you're interested in that. Caveat: if you're using ham frequencies to run this, if you're using ham power levels, blah blah blah, it might not be compliant. Figured I'd throw that out there. Everybody who does this hobby, you know, should hopefully have a good understanding of radio stuff, what is and isn't right to do. So your experience may vary. Do the right thing for your regulatory environment, et cetera, et cetera.
So say you've got a group of people then, and you want to say that these are the pilots in the group, and if someone a couple of fields over with a big antenna starts flying with formation flight, we don't want to see their data. How do people lock that in before they take off?
It's presently done during build time. My intention is right. You can see on the left side there's dashboard and update. I have something turned off in the UI right now, which is a settings tab. My hope is to have a whole bunch of settings you can flip on and off from there, one of which being change the group key from that settings display if you want to. And that would get saved to persistent storage, so you don't need to do it every time, just once.
So you just send the group key to your friends via whatever chat client, and then when they connect to the web page, they synchronize the group key to the one you're using for that flying session, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the group key is plain alphanumeric, so you can use, you know, whatever word you want. By default, encryption is enabled with the group key Open Sesame. That way, it's just, you know, it's encrypted by default, but like by default, you'll also connect to one another, right?
Okay, makes sense. Wow, there's a lot going on here. Congratulations. I appreciate, you know, as a single developer working in their spare time, you've accomplished a heck of a lot, considering the, you know, INAV radar's been around for a few years and just kind of been ticking along. This is kind of an explosive amount of activity.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I don't know, it was something of a passion project. After I got it working in the first couple of changes I made, it just went on from there. And I have to say a huge thank you to the folks who've been helping me out in testing, helping me out in development. Not sure how many of them want their names shouted out, but you know, there's some great folks out there who have been helping a lot. So thank you very, very much.
I guess that's mainly in the Discord again, is it?
Yeah. So there's some folks in the Discord who have been helping out with testing, helping out with development. They're lovely folks. I've got a little label for them. They're colored blue in there. People who have been running it, you know, since the early days, beta testing, willing to test all the silly broken things that occur with an early project like this. So I really appreciate all their help, as well as some folks locally here in the Pacific Northwest who've been flying with me since the very early fork of INAV radar days.
Yeah, and you were saying as well about the just sort of hopping back. There's the idea of the beacon where you've got just just the formation flight radio connected direct to a GPS.
Yeah.
How's that working? I guess because you've got the UART on the radio, it can just connect to a UART on a GPS, and that just works.
Yeah, so there's a piece of hardware I would recommend for this. You can build it yourself. It's a little bit complicated. It's not terrible, but just there's already an existing piece of hardware, and that's the LilyGo TTGo T-Beam. That's Tango Bravo Echo Alpha Mike. That's a product that has an inbuilt 900 megahertz, unfortunately, LoRa modem with GPS and an 18650. So if you are using 900 megahertz formation flight, this is a great radio to use as a beacon. Built-in antenna, built-in GPS. There's a target for it. You build it, throw it wherever it needs to be, and it'll just work.
Were you doing NMEA GPS?
Yeah. Right now it is NMEA only. I do want to support the U-Blocks protocol, but once again, PRs are accepted if you're interested in that feature.
Well, it looks like a lot of those NMEA GPS might be less useful in other locations. So, yeah, could be a good chance to take them out and repurpose them for formation flight.
Absolutely, yeah. and it'll
So-
do autobot and everything. So as long as the GPS speaks NMEA and it's connected to a secondary UART, the SP32 has 3 UARTs. Yeah, that'll just work.
I was just going to ask, if you're flying with multiple pilots, is it a case of you configure it so you've got like I've got pilot A, pilot B, pilot C here, or have you built in some sort of thing so you can switch between positions of people? Or
Yeah, that's a lovely question. So the iNav existing OSD, the one that I haven't made any changes to, tries to do the HUD thing. So every pilot that's up, you'll see their tile exist in the HUD essentially. For the one that I created, which is more like a home position arrow, every, I believe, 2 seconds, it'll rotate through every active pier. So if you can hear 2 people, it'll go back and forth every 2 seconds, which to me, that's probably good enough. If anybody else has a better idea on how to incorporate that, I'd be happy to hear it.
Well, with every higher resolution displays for some of the digital systems, it might be feasible to even have all 6 permanently on screen just as a single element.
Absolutely, yeah. I know.
Are the digital systems actually pixel capable? I mean, they're obviously working in character mode at the moment, but
Yes,
is there a possibility of them doing something different?
So the MSP link between the flight controller and the goggles is character based, but on the goggles they can pretty much just render PNGs onto the goggles. So you can kind of do whatever you want on the goggles, but you've got that limited bandwidth between the flight controller and that over-the-air link over to the goggles, which kind of chokes the possibility of doing that in a really elegant fashion, unfortunately.
Mm.
And as Dominic Clifton has mentioned in the comments, he's got a pixel-based OSD that works with all his stuff. And yeah, that would be very, very, very slick. If you know your camera FOV and can account for that in a pixel-based OSD with very high resolution, yeah, you could do some, think fighter jet style. Yeah, that would be real slick.
Because you've got 2 factors to make that moving OSD with the position markers move. You've got to figure out your FPV camera angle and also the FOV angle, and if those numbers are off, it's going to be kind of confusing, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is an existing problem as well with the iNav implementation as it stands. And one of the things that when I ported it to RDPilot, I decided to go a different direction. Again, it's my opinion. I like the simplicity of a single, a pair of vectors, right? A horizontal vector and a vertical vector. If other folks like OSD more, I'd be happy to hear it. Happy to, however you want to make it work on the flight controller will work with Formation Flight. It doesn't care. All it does is feeds the position information. So if you'd prefer the OSD, that's something you absolutely have the option to do.
There we are. So there's an update from iNav here by the looks of it. Mark with the CFPV. At MUSTARDTIGER, the HUD elements will be adjustable and split in separate elements with 7.0 probably. So you can select if you want to see heading, distance, RSSI, etc. So that could be interesting.
Neat. Yeah, that definitely clean up the UI on iNav. Cool.
Yeah, I think Mark's from the iNav fixed wing group. I encourage you to have a look at formationflight.org, see what's going on there, because there's a really interesting development that kind of enables that feature for a bunch of different people and makes it easier to use much cheaper hardware. Is the short premise of this, in case any other people have jumped in halfway through. I did spam the chat link around quite a few places, but it's easy to forget about these things. So yeah, the real gotcha here was previously you needed to basically be an ESP32 developer to get this thing up and running. But now we're seeing you can take very cheap hardware that's been designed for Express LRS and is now available not just cheaply, but also worldwide. So you don't need to go to stores on AliExpress and hunt this stuff down. So you can go to your local RC store and you can get £10, 10 of your local currency units generally, worth of Express LRS 2.4 gig receiver, which is tiny and light. And you can program this using the existing Express LRS web flashing system, which is easy to use and functions as an access point already. So you could even do it from a mobile phone and things like that. And then all the configuration is going to be handled within that web interface. So you don't need to go and get complex tools on your PC to make this work, which I think it tackles the cost, it tackles availability, and it tackles ease of use all in one fell swoop, which is just fantastic to see.
Thank you. Yeah, it's that was sort of my goal with it, make it a little bit easier to use and hopefully get more folks using it, right? iNav Radar was tremendous, and I can't say thank you enough to all the folks who did work on that, especially Olivier C, who's been doing the main development on it recently. At this point, I just wanted to take it, a few steps further and hopefully get more folks using it, right? And I thought getting that barrier of less expensive, more easily available hardware is a huge difference. And yeah, Mark, to answer your comment there, no, you don't need to use Express LRS. It's just the hardware is cheap and available. So I wrote Formation Flight primarily to target Express LRS hardware. It does work with pretty much any ESP variant. And if nobody else has anything, I figure Insipid Monkey asked a question about the ESP Now functionality. You mind if I jump into that?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to mention that myself.
Sweet. Yeah. So ESP Now is a really neat thing that's supported by ESP8266 and ESP32 microcontrollers. They, of course, have the built-in Wi-Fi. They also have the ability to do something called ESP Now, which is effectively I think the kindest term I can use is a bastardization of Wi-Fi frames in order to remove a lot of the infrastructure around Wi-Fi, right? That is to say, there's no like a network name or anything like that. It works essentially as a broadcast mechanism. So that's one of the additional radio types I implemented for Formation Flight. The goal being primarily you would use LoRa on whatever frequency you chose. 2.4 is, of course, my recommendation. It gets just about 10K worth of range, which hopefully should be more than enough for the vast majority of use cases. If you really want more, there's 900 and 433, which are right around 100Ks. But for most folks, 2.4 LoRa is going to be the way to do it. Primarily, what my goal with ESP Now is two things. A, for folks who don't want to do LoRa-based stuff, ESP Now works up to about 1K, and it's very easy and cheap to find ESP chips on their own. They cost right around $2 or $3 US if you find them in the right places. Again, the range is going to be significantly less. It's about 1 to 2K max, but they work just the same as the LoRa versions. My other goal with ESP Now, and this is not realized yet, is to have a secondary link in addition to your LoRa link, such that if you fly 2.4 LoRa Formation Flight and your friend flies 900 LoRa Formation Flight, you'll still be able to connect to each other so long as you're within 1 to 2Ks. And then if you were further away, then LoRa would work.
Nice. That sounds like the best of both worlds.
Yeah. I'm excited about the potential that has. You can turn it on right now, but it does horrible things to your timing. All the receivers try and synchronize with one another, and when you have two radios operational, they can get into some really interesting states when you start doing that.
So we have a question from Dominic Clifton, Hydra, about the ESP hardware that you've been using, wondering if you've looked at the new S3 chip from ESP32.
Absolutely, yes. And I've got one on my desk right here, which is the LilyGo T3 S3. And I've got Formation Flight up and running on that. Unfortunately, I think this is missing one pin to make it usable by default, but I think I'll be able to bodge it in. This particular piece of hardware. It's a pretty big one. It's a dev board. But yes, absolutely. If you've got it running on S3 and you've got in this case, I believe they forgot to connect the DIO1 line, whatever you want to call that. I use both of the DIO pins in my interaction with the SX1280. So I believe this board will require a bodge to work, but if your board has both of the DIO pins connected, which I assume it does, then yes, absolutely, you could run Formation Flight directly on there.
Excellent. Wow. Just compatible with everything you can get your hands on by the sound of it, which is fantastic. So I think all the fixed wing people out there who are talking about formation flying, if you have GPS, this is just the way to go, isn't it?
And I think 1 to 2 kilometers on ESP Now is like, if you want more, then you may be some way off flying in formation. Normally you're missing each other by sort of 50 meters, not like, oh, I'm 10 kilometers that way. It's like you've gone the wrong way. And you're flying that way
a couple of years ago, like 1.5 kilometers away, your main radio link would be dead anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've had really good experience with ESP Now as long as you have an external antenna. If you have an internal antenna, it's not great. It's around 100 meters. But yeah, it absolutely does work. It works surprisingly well. I think we've gotten far more range out of it than any of us expected. Right about, I think 1.8 Ks is the absolute max we've seen in practice, but that's about 1K more than I expected it to do in its absolute best case. So yeah, it is absolutely an option if you want it. I think 2.4 LoRa is where the main majority of development is going to be. But yeah, if you have a bare ESP32 or an 8266 dev board, Wemos D1 Mini, whatever you might have, you can absolutely slap that on there and run it on ESP now. Works great.
Nice. There's kind of the fascinating use case as well of people who, they're flying a wing, they don't have a flight controller in it. They could take a little Express LRS receiver, or someone could give them a little Express LRS receiver with the GPS connected to it and be like, yeah, here you are. There's like a servo lead attached to it. Power this up and stick it with some hot glue inside your wing, and we'll know where you are and we'll come find you.
Exactly.
That does sound good.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that a way of like you've got an inexpensive rescue solution? Like I've crashed my plane somewhere, but if the battery's still in place and you've still got this signal, you can presumably find it because you'll know your distance and your GPS coordinates, and you can tunnel along into the field and get it.
Yeah, so this is something we've actually discussed a few times, using formation flight to be able to find your aircraft. Absolutely. You can do that right now. It works just fine for that. I've done that a few times, actually. I had some relatively small aircraft go out pretty far out in a field and had to go hunt for it. And I just brought along that little TTGO T-beam. And when I got within about 500 meters, that was ESP now on the ground. So I expected the range to be reduced. It was still pretty darn good. It locked on, and I've got on the little OLED display that I'm X meters away in this direction, and I was able to walk right to it. I do have some ideas around including boards with internal batteries and being able to say, hey, the last MSP message I got from the aircraft was that it was armed, and then I lost the MSP link. That tells me the aircraft is downed, unavailable in some way, shape, or form. So stop trying to be a normal formation flight receiver and start doing different LoRa encoding in order to get longer range. That way, hopefully it would be a little bit better to find.
I look forward to seeing Curry's videos on this, adding on to his playlist of various ways of finding your crashed aircraft.
Feel free to chat with me.
When beepers don't work because it's kilometers away, then try a radio link.
Maybe we might see these integrated with lost model alarms because these are not high power devices. Would it be a great possible to integrate with a lost model alarm with a beeper, a battery back beeper?
Absolutely, yeah. Just an ESP chip and a nice little antenna on it would be perfect. So a few questions in the comments. Mark with a C asks, I have 3 planes with the original TTGO LoRa hardware. Yes, it does work with the original TTGO LoRa hardware. There are targets for all of that. You can flash that. It's drop-in compatible. Unless you're using the V1.6 board, I changed which pins are used for RX and TX. You got to just move those over real quick. Other than that, though, completely drop-in compatible. You can use it exactly the same way as you have been with INAV radar. It's just faster, better. And then Insipid Monarchy asks, have you touched on using formation flight and ELRS on the same band on the same aircraft? I was very pleasantly surprised with how well this went. I expected it to work, but I expected there to be a noticeable hit to LQ. I was wrong. It works way better than I had ever possibly anticipated. I keep the power pretty low in formation flight just to be sure, but I did a pretty considerably LR flight at 25 milliwatts TX power for Express LRS. A couple weeks later, when I was reviewing that aircraft that I did it with, I realized that it had formation flight up and running the whole time, and I didn't even notice. That was with ELRS at minimum power for the radio that I use, out quite some distance. So it seems to be completely unnoticeable, which is great to hear.
You were saying you don't cover all of the band that ELRS uses, right? You're just in the lower part of that band. You kind of restricted it a bit.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So I chose with formation flight to not do frequency hopping. And the goal there was couple-fold. Hopefully it'll simplify the sync procedure. Right now, something like ELRS, you only have 2 things to try and synchronize with one another, a transmitter and a receiver, and one is always in charge. formation flight, who's in charge, who's synchronizing with whom. So it's a much tougher problem to solve. And when you add more variables like frequency and time slot and all this kind of stuff, synchronizing becomes really difficult. So I chose to keep it, just a single frequency, nice low in the 2.4 gig band. And then ELRS hops all around up higher. So it's pretty much, it doesn't seem to have any impact on flying. You can run 2.4 ELRS alongside formation flight. It runs just fine.
Awesome. So yeah, maybe one packet in 20 might be colliding, but
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It kind of doesn't matter.
Is the because you were saying it can do 6 pilots?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a limitation of ELRS, or is that just a limitation of formation flight? I'm just wondering, is there a case where if you had 6 pilots all using formation flight and all using ELRS, is that going to cause a problem?
It's going to be slightly worse, but my experience with running 2.4 systems next to each other, modern 2.4 systems, LoRa-based ones, they work just surprisingly well altogether. I think, if you had 6 people who are all using ELRS 2.4 control and all using formation flight 2.4 and all using pretty high power and blah, 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 you're probably going to see some low LQs, 60s, 70s, but that's still super flyable with the LRS, right? One thing you can do is if you're staying pretty close, use some of the faster options like the F500 option Express LRS that uses less airtime, which would give more folks the ability to stay up and running. But broadly, it just works surprisingly well. As to, is 6 a limitation? It is a soft limitation in the sense that I had a couple of variables to balance, and that was the exact set of variables I chose. That is to say, to achieve 10 hertz, it updates 10 times a second, right? Across 433, 868, 915, and 2.4, and ESP now, which all have slightly different transmit times, at the ranges that I wanted to accomplish with the number of people in the air that I wanted to accomplish, the particular set of parameters I chose balances out with, essentially 6 people in the air, 10 updates per second, and that's the spot that works, right?
Absolutely, and it makes sense. What we have experienced with FPV, 6 is a good number to have in the air.
I think past 6, you're starting to run into VTX channel issues, and at that point, if anybody does really want to run this with 8 people, 10 people, let me know. There are ways we could configure this to work with 8 or 10. You're just going to sacrifice update rate or range. But I figured for the vast majority of people, I think 10 hertz is very good. Generally, the nicest GPSs most of us are running are exactly 10 hertz. So that's a really nice balance of all those parameters.
I think it's good.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I think there's a few people who are struggling to get higher rate of GPS updates, but that's really for that kind of beta flight, like super aggressive return to home. Like, let's not return to home like Archipilot. Let's return to home like a racing quad. Like, only just I want to rip and do like just an invert, split S back over the pilot's head and then come down. Yeah,
perfect.
We need nice fast GPS for that. But I think the top units are getting to like 18 hertz, 25 hertz. So 10 hertz is still, it's up there. It's good enough for most things.
Absolutely, yeah. I will say the tracking feels super tight because it does update 10 times per second. When you're following somebody, that position arrow is pretty much dead on them. Depending on aircraft, there is a sort of open problem I'm still working through, which is effectively pipeline delay from GPS through flight controller into formation flight, flight controller, OSD. In some cases, I've found that to be maybe 10, 25 milliseconds. Some weird combinations, for some reason, that feels more like 200, 300 milliseconds. So what that means is the position that it's tracking might be slightly behind the person that you're actually following. I have some ideas on how to solve that. The original iNav radar did some effectively projection using ground speed, saying, hey, where will you be in a second? For the time being, it's probably not necessary, but it might be nice to do that. I think the vast majority of folks won't notice it unless you're doing some real close formation chases, and at that point, I think you know where the person is, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, I imagine, useful in those kind of setups where we've all taken off. Where did everyone go? Before you've got people in visual.
Exactly, yeah.
The only time is if someone's really on your tail. Maybe it could be nice to know that they're right behind you.
I will also say that, yeah, that brings up a really good point, Frank. A place where I've found it extremely useful is when somebody's following me very closely, or say staying right off my port side flank, and I need to know how to fly in such a way that I'm not going to get into their flight path. I no longer have to ask them, hey, where are you? Are you off my right wing? Are you off my tail? Right, and try and get the synchronization. I can look at my OSD element and say, cool, they're off my right side. I'll make a left turn coming up here.
You're like, ooh, 10 meters off my right side. Ooh, okay.
Yeah, it's when you start getting down into the single digit and you can see the decimal place, 9.7 meters, 8.5 meters. Okay, yeah, we're getting close.
That's enough, yeah. So you've done a heck of a lot with this so far. There's a lot of features that have kind of come out of left field that people weren't expecting, which is fantastic. But where do you take it next? Where do you see the project going?
It's a wonderful question. My hope is to sort of get it easier to use. We've talked about a couple of things that I'd like to do. One of the main things that's in the pipeline right now, and thank you very much to the folks who have been developing on this. Let me see if I can find the information I'm looking for. Yeah, so M. Muskie, you might see in the chat, has been tremendously helpful with a couple of things on Formation Flight. Thank you so much. Something he's been kind of carrying to the finish line that I barely started and then got distracted into other things with is for people running F411 flight controllers, which only have 2 available UARTs. You want to use one of those for control, and then you're out of UARTs. Formation Flight wouldn't necessarily be feasible. And my thought is, hey, what if we do the GPS pass-through? So in this case, GPS gets connected directly to an ESP32 Formation Flight radio, which then converts the GPS messages into MSP GPS messages. That way you can use just one UART on your flight controller. If you're running, say, an F411, you can still use Formation Flight. And this is really nice for those like 3-4 inch sort of INAV capable little long range aircraft, right? The ones that run off 2 18650s or something like that. Was it Flywheel Explorer kind of class of aircraft that all run F411s? That's perfect, right? Be able to find each other on those too.
Now, the history of MSP-enabled GPS is fairly brief, I think it's fair to say. So do you think that there's going to be a bunch of fixing up on the FC firmware side to make sure that they're actually going to acknowledge MSP GPS updates correctly?
I suppose there's one way to find out.
Certainly is.
Yeah, let's see. Do I have any sort of major plans? I've got a page on the Formation Flight GitHub that says what I want to work on next. Let me see if I can find that. I'd like to do pass-through flashing in the same way as Express LRS supports. So, for example, Betaflight pass-through, I think, is what the feature is mainly called. That's something I'd really like to do. And then the other, I suppose, the main thing that I'd like to do is do persistent configuration on the actual radio rather than doing it at build time. Right now, a whole bunch of settings are done at build time, which is slightly annoying if you want to do them out in the field. And yeah, my hope is to convert a lot of those to persistent storage. You go in the web UI, tick some boxes, fill in some fields, change it right there, save and reboot, and it comes back up with the new configuration.
Nice. Very nice. We're taking some lessons that have been learned over in the Express LRS project there as well, I see.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm hoping to keep the build system a little bit simpler. I don't necessarily need to do unified targets or anything like that, but for now, yeah, there's a lot of things I would like to move to dynamic configuration, and that means things like turning on and off radios. There's a little mode where it will spoof some peers, so that if you're setting it up at home, don't have friends to connect with at that very moment, you can run a command and make sure your flight controller will understand when peers do come up. All of those things would be nice to get in the web UI, and that's sort of what I'm working on, is the making it easier part of things. I don't foresee us having a proper configurator. I think that's probably unnecessary for the scale of this project. Just stick to mostly mostly web-based stuff.
Certainly the easiest for out in the field, which is Jack's
Absolutely.
preference. You know, does all his configuration when he gets to the field. And have Wi-Fi up for that.
Perfect.
Not having to have like another configurator to keep track of and make sure it's in the right version to update that particular thing. That also sounds excellent.
But all those configurators, I mean,
Pretty
even
sure,
people like TBS, they're slowly drifting towards web-based solutions anyway.
Yeah.
Just a matter of time before everyone coalesces on that.
Speaking of Wi-Fi out in the field, being able to connect to your aircraft from your phone and look at that web UI, it's silly. It has effectively no practical purpose, but it was very fun to stick one of my planes in loiter, connect to the ESP's Wi-Fi, and look at all of its parameters, look at the speed and everything from my phone.
Do you think people might put one in their radio in future, so they could have one in their radio that they could always just, connect to with their phone, as instead of needing to synchronize your GPS and wait until it's locked on before you take off, you could just kind of have one that's stuck in your radio, and then you take off and wait for it to get GPS, and you're away.
I suppose sort of the sky's the limit, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say something about something I had planned, and it's gone now. Such is life.
Sorry.
No worries.
You did mention that it's on your GitHub, so if anyone is looking for the updates on up-and-coming ideas, go over to Formation Flight on GitHub, have a look at Mustard Tiger's work.
Absolutely, yeah. Formationflight.org is the site that'll help you through just about everything. And then there's a lovely Discord. Again, the link is in this YouTube video's description. I'm Mustard Tiger there. Feel free to hit me up there, and I'm happy to help you out with getting it set up, getting it sorted. Any features you want to see, feel free to shoot those over in the Discord, and we'll talk them out and see if we can get them done.
Makes me want to try it out. It's just so hard to fly on my own, let alone finding someone else to fly with me at the moment. I am Billy No Mates in my local area.
I'm very fortunate to have a couple of local folks, a few of whom have dropped in and said hi.
Nice.
Yeah, again, I don't know if they want me to shout out who they are, but they're in there, and yeah, they're tremendous, lovely folks who are willing to put up with my oh hey, flash this build right before you leave the house. Willing to do crazy things like stick a version of ArduPilot I built last night at 11 p.m. on their aircraft and go fly it in the morning. It'll go fine, trust me. It did go fine, but I appreciate those lovely local folks who have been helping me out with that. Thank you.
It's a high level of trust.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, and not so local. If you're running like 433 megahertz off some giant dev board, they could be 50 miles down the road, sort of local, right?
Yeah. So that's something I suppose is worth discussing on range. The original INAV radar chose some LoRa parameters that were chosen. I think that they may not have been the ones that I would have chosen for that particular use case. By my math, the original INAV radar on 433, for example, if everything is working right, should be around 500 Ks, which is excessive.
Yeah. Hi, where are you? Oh, I'm in Texas. Oh, I'm not.
So I've got a page on formationflight.org/info that has rough location estimates, or sorry, rough range estimates, and it includes ESP now 2.4 gig LoRa, 2.4 gig LoRa with different antennas. Ballpark, yeah, the 2.4 gig LoRa I think is the sweet spot where just about everywhere you'll be reasonably flying. You can find your friends. You won't get dropouts if you go to a weird attitude and that kind of thing.
Yeah, 433 seems like the proverbial sledgehammer to crack this problem. It's a whole lot of range.
It is. On that note, completely unrelated formation flight, but I have been making some True Diversity 433 radios for Express LRS.
Wow.
It's absurd. It's silly. I've got a couple of them on the desk here, and I still need to flight test them. But yeah, 433 is done with modern day protocols. These have a 50 milliwatt
unless
max
you have like special legal dispensation to fly not just beyond visual line of sight, but possibly in a completely different legal jurisdiction.
Exactly. Yeah. So these ones I have in front of me are only 50 milliwatt max power, and by the math, they should be able to exceed 400 Ks very easily.
Wow.
Which I don't know what we fly that could hit that, but I don't know.
I feel like in the
Solar.
UK at least, just the amount of just noise of other things on 433 probably means that that's going to be the bigger limitation than just the penetration, the broadcast of that signal.
Quite possibly, yeah. It's real silly. The antennas are huge. A lot of folks were using 433 for INAV radar because the parameters chosen and the way that they worked, even though it should have had super long range, it felt a lot shorter than it should have been, essentially, is the way I'll say it. So a lot of folks were suggested to use 433. I would really not recommend that anymore with formation flight. Stick with 2.4 LoRa or ESP now. That's the way to go.
That's straight up double the size for your crossfire antenna to get down to 433.
Yeah.
433 for people who want dipoles this big stuck to their brains.
How big is your plane? Not big enough.
Bigger antenna, it's better, man. That's how it works.
Yep. Yeah, for flying information with someone on the other side of the planet. Yeah.
Hey, you'll find each other. That's the goal.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, when do you hit an overflow error on your SD elements? That's going to be the problem, isn't it?
In testing, it's surprisingly good about it. A lot of times, during testing, I'd initialize the aircraft at like 0, and then spoof a pier, where I'm actually sitting in the PNW, or bring up a real pier in the PNW. And before I added guards to prevent coming up at 0, I think it's 7,000 Ks or 13,000. I forget what the exact number is. Some absurd amount of distance. And RD Pilot did a tremendous job of handling,
Nice.
displaying that distance.
Fantastic. Well, that builds some faith. That's good.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Mark C, who was appearing before, I think a Blackie FPV, he was on here before discussing flying via 3G and 4G modems. So that would be a perfect accompaniment, I feel, for these ludicrous range handsets.
There you go. Yeah, run your 433 megahertz 4G video. There you go.
I mean, you might have to be up quite high to avoid the curvature of the Earth and stuff, but you're probably in all sorts of trouble already for going that far out of.
He had a neat little app that was doing
digital
telemetry on the web, I think, didn't he? Via 3G and 4G radios. That was kind of cool.
Yeah. So, I do actually remember
like
what I
Yahoo.
wanted to discuss a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Something else that was sort of in vestigial stages back in the INAV radar days was connecting one of your modems, one of your INAV formation flight radio, whatever we want to call them, beacon nodes. That's a good term. Connecting one of your beacon nodes to a ground station and then being able to show everybody's position. I've got that loosely working. It kind of sort of works.
Sweet.
There's still a lot of stuff to be done, but the hope is to be able to feed all of that data into Mission Planner. Don't have to be running RD Pilot. It spoofs 6 aircraft and speaks Mavlink over UDP. So you just connect to the Wi-Fi of one beacon, and then you can sit there on the ground and have everybody on a map.
That's cool.
Cool.
So if someone's taking a break and they're not wearing goggles or whatever, they can just sidle over to a laptop and be like, I wonder where everybody's at.
Absolutely. It's also nice for, just spotting, especially on certain types of missions. You could like overlay your mission planner with ADS-B data, just, to be extra safe and say, hey, let's not go that direction, that altitude. There's some cool things you can do once you've got
ADS-B overlay would be a fantastic use case for that. Nice.
Yeah, and that already exists in Mission Planner. So being able to overlay, your formations position with ADS-B with ground maps and all that could be quite nice.
Yeah, definitely. I was even thinking about, it's recently been the FPV combat meetup where they were, trying to do the laser tag, or there's even like crashing them into each other as well as a form of combat. And so, if you had all of them, you could have some nice little kind of war maps of them all flying around, crashing into each other. That could be quite fun.
That'd be fun, and then they disappear once they hit one another. It's perfect.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you could do with that.
Just need an all green OSD and get back to the kind of Apache gunship look with all your like friend or foe recognizing.
Yeah.
Possible with modern digital OSDs. There you go.
Yeah.
Change your
Yeah,
OSD to
just
look like
flip
that.
it onto another page. I think that's dropping any day now. The red, green, amber, white pages. So look at that one.
Yeah, but there's absolutely a lot of opportunity for features. Again, if anybody has any cool ideas, anything you want to see out of Formation Flight, feel free to drop into that Discord, say hi. Shoot me a message. We'll see if we can get something implemented.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Mustard Tiger. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and telling us about a frankly fascinating project. You've done an incredible amount in what I think is a very short amount of time as well. Obviously, building on prior projects, and due credit to INAV Radar and everyone that's come before you, but huge congratulations on building something so impressive and so useful and so attainable to a lot of pilots as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with y'all and hopefully get some more folks using Formation Flight. It'll be nice to see you out there and see y'all in my OSD.
Awesome. Well, yep, we'll be seeing Mustard Tiger on ISD in the near future, I'm sure, blasting out on 433 megahertz across the waves. All right. You have been joined by Andrew/Frank.
Bye.
Everyone's favorite curry kitten.
I'm down here now. Bye.
And Jack, who's just dropped. Thank you very
There he
much,
is.
Jack.
Hello. I
Goodbye.
didn't say anything the whole show, so you need not.
It went
It was the most
beautifully, Jack.
intelligent thing you've
Went
ever said.
beautifully. And of
know.
course, by our fantastic guest, Mustard Tiger. Thank you so much for joining us.
Again,
Cheers.
thank you all for having me.
All right. Have a good day or evening wherever you are. Catch you next week.
Thank the Patreons.
Thank you, our wonderful Patreons, for enabling us to do this, keeping the website online, paying the editor, and 1,001 other useful things that make the show happen and keep the wheels on. Thank you so much. You're awesome. Look at patreon.org, Let's Drone Out, to become a Patreon where you can pay to edit the show, get your name in the credits, etc.
.org.
Is it patreon.com?
Patreon.com/Let's
We
Drone Out.
try.
That's the one.
We try. And on that note of failure and lack of accomplishment, it's another episode of Let's Drone Out in the can.
Do you think Patreon.org some dodgy phishing site is just at everybody too?
Hey, as long